What's up, guys? We got a new video. We are rated 1061 against Jason Ping 931. He opens up with 1e4. We're going to respond with knight f6. This is the Alekhine's defense. Normally they push to try to refute you. They push e5, so you have to jump your knight around. But here he doesn't even go for it. He just plays knight c3. So I'm going to transpose into the appearance with d6 since he didn't go for the Alekhine setup. He goes d3, which is passive, and protects the pawn in the center. We're going to go g6 and fianchetto our bishop on the long diagonal now that these dark squares in the center are open for us. He moves the same piece twice and retreats his knight. This doesn't threaten anything. The drawback is that it's a huge waste of time. He's not developing a piece and he's no closer to castling. So we're just going to develop a piece. And we're going to bring our bishop out. He goes c4. This weakens all the dark squares in the center, which is good for me. And it threatens nothing. I'm just going to castle and continue increasing my position. He goes b3. This threatens nothing. And it weakens this long diagonal severely. So I'm noticing that I have an extra on the rook now. That's one of the drawbacks of his move. And so it looks like I have a tactic. Knight takes pawn in the center, opening up my bishop. I'm just noticing now an idea that occurs a lot that I just completely forgot about is if you take this, he does have the counter taking here. And normally you would have this check, but because he did this horrible knight move, it magically defends that square. So because I'm not used to this knight being here, I didn't take that nuance into consideration. So this guy outsmarted me. But maybe he doesn't see it. We'll take the rook. And if he goes here, we go back. So you don't lose anything, but still, I wasn't expecting not to be able to go to c3. He brings his queen in the corner. This threatens a single check. Drawback is it's just moving his queen, but it is on a good diagonal, so. I'm going to go f6. Now that I gave my dark square bishop away, I want some control over the dark squares. I don't want him to just let his queen have free reign. So by playing f6, I can now play e5, and I have this nice pawn triangle, which solidifies my dark squares. He brings his knight out. What does this threaten? It threatens nothing. It just develops. The drawback, well, no real drawback. It's a decent move. But like I said, I'm going to put my pawn in the center, stopping his knights completely and his queen. So now his pieces are super stifled. He should probably bring his knight back. Wow, he finds it. Good for him. The threat, well, he's not threatening anything, but it's much better on this circuit since it looks at the d5 square, which makes sense. The drawback is he wastes time. So I'm just going to continue developing. We're going to throw our bishop here, maybe threaten to double his pawns. Just get another piece out because here it's not doing anything and these are bad squares. He jumps his knight into the center. What does this threaten? Nothing, just put some pressure on these pawns. Downside, he's moving the same piece again. And of course, I'm just going to play the extremely simple, extremely obvious c6, controlling the square so no knight can ever jump in it. The drawback of my move is that it weakens the d6 square. So if he could ever stack like 3 heavy pieces on there in an endgame, it would be weak. But that also means like that you have to take into consideration I'm up 3 pawns, so that's not ever Not 3 pawns, 3 points of material. So like, who cares if you make a pawn weakness, right? So he moves his knight out of the way and threatens our bishop. We're just gonna take so we don't lose time. We're taking because it's tempo move, because he has to recapture, which means it's our turn again. And we double his pawn structure, but that's secondary, right? So we have one knight, it's a slow piece, it needs to get out. Could go this circuit, could go this circuit, but it really could go this circuit, and that's my favorite one. So let's go knight a6. He moves his rook and develops it, stares at my king. The threat is actually he's threatening a check now. It doesn't matter because I can move my king away, but there is the check. Something to keep in mind. I'm going to make sure there is none of that and put my king in the corner. Now, I don't want his knight on my half of the board for no reason, like if I can help it. So he pushes the pawn, maybe trying to open stuff up, but if he takes, I'm going to take with the f pawn and open up my rook. And if he pushes, trying to attack me, then I'm going to push, closing things down. So I'm trying to stop it either way. Another drawback of this move is it just hangs. But if I take, then I weaken some of my control over these dark squares. It does come with tempo though. So let's say his knight moves somewhere. I mean, that's playable, but I don't see a reason to do that. I want to get my knight into a better position. And since he just undefended this pawn, I'm going to go this way. Because you could still use this route, but it also comes with threats. He does take the pawn. You could take either way, open the queen, but I guess I'll just open the rook. It does take away the pawn's control of g5, but he has nothing to put there anytime soon, so. And I'm sure I could bring this in at some point. There's this check to consider. There's this queen move, which coordinates on f2 and hits the pawn, which is already hanging right now. Oh, my clocks are messed up. He has 7 minutes and 45 seconds. I have 5 minutes and 4 seconds. And we'll see what he does. I mean, he doesn't really have any ideas. So he tries to throw his knight maybe to h6, but that actually doesn't do anything, you know, at the end of the day. I also have this pawn is hanging in the center. That's something. But I want to get my queen into the game. I actually have this check as well, which forces him to move his king. I also have this move, but I'm going to come in with the check just to get him to move his king. See where he goes. Make him burn some time on the clock. I could bring my rook in maybe for some checkmate ideas. So he moves his king. Now he's over to a light square. Fine. But now I could take this with tempo and maybe coordinate some squares. So I'm going to do that. And what's black's threat? Well, checkmate in 1 is my biggest threat. I'm also threatening to take this pawn. I'm also threatening to queen trade. I'm also threatening to bring my rook in. So it's a completely lost position for white. He might not even see this checkmate in 1 threat because it looks like I just took a pawn. So I'm not sure if he saw it or he's just moving his king, but I still have this check. It forces his king here. And then I jump my knight in with check, and then he has to sack the queen. Alright, so try to calculate this if you can. Check. Right, his king has to go here. Hold on, I just want to make sure I don't have an even better thing. Check here, he just goes down. And then you have to repeat, because you can't bring the rook in because of the knight. So yeah, check here, king here, knight here, check. He can't move his king, so he takes with the queen. and then he'll resign maybe. Let's pre-move the take with the queen because it's a forced move. There are no other options. And just as I predicted, he resigns. Okay, so my clocks are fixed. They're set to when the game is over, not when the game is in process. So that's dumb. I gotta fix that. But for this one video, you can bear with me, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now playing Donald Bethlehem. Very interesting name. Donald Bethlehem. What are the chances that's his actual last name? Anyway, we go c4 and we face reverse Sicilian. We've seen this many times in the speedrun. They then bring out their knight to defend this pawn and develop a piece. We continue in like fashion, developing a piece, putting the bishop in the fianchetto square, covering the center. He brings out the second knight, covering central squares. I'm going to match him and bring out my central knight and cover the same central squares. So now we're just punch for punch. Develop, develop. He develops another minor piece towards the center. Prepares castling. Puts pressure on f2. So it's crazy stuff right now. Drawback. No real drawbacks. I mean, it loosens this pawn a bit, but okay. So yeah, what do we want to do? We probably want to develop as well. One of these moves looks normal. If we go here and he pushes, we can go knight g5 and the pawn will be triple hit. Let's just go for that. If he pushes and you try something like d4, he could take, and if you take, he gets another piece. So he goes knight g4. What does this threaten? We've seen this before in other games. They threaten the f2 pawn, and in all those games, I castle and I kick the knight. This game is going to be no different. I'm going to castle. Now there's no threat, right? Because two pieces are worth, they're a lot better in the middle game than the rook. So he just castles. And now I can just kick his knight saying, well, you wasted time with all that. There's another tempo move on the bishop, putting a knight in the center. So I have options. I'm going to kick the knight just to get it off my half of the board and relieve any potential pressure in the future. So he goes back to where he came from. So I got in like free loof for my king, let's say. I want to get my bishop out. I want to develop it. Maybe you could go like this plan on the queen side, but I'm guessing you can also go this way as well. Let's just start with d3. Look at this. Maybe we can trade. He jumps his knight in the center. What does this threaten? Threatens a knight trade at best. Drawback, moving the same piece twice. But it's not like a terrible move, except for the fact it undefends the central pawn. That consideration makes it a terrible move. However, if we take this, let's just quickly look for black's best response. This doesn't do anything. Kicking it, we just go back. Rook over, we go back. This pawn is protected twice. So we're going to take the free pawn in the center. And this oversight by black means that white now has a winning position. So he goes c6. What does this threaten? I mean, it opens the queen's diagonal. I mean, maybe he wants to play d5. Takes, 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 you know, and then he's defending it one more time. Maybe. But the drawback is it wastes time. It doesn't develop a piece. And it's my move now. So I don't have to let him do any of that, right? So what do I do? I mean, this knight looks just misplaced. We can develop normally, but that might let him like do d6 or d5 or whatever plan he has in mind. So I'm gonna play a weakening move, e3. It weakens my light squares and it weakens my pawn construction a little bit. But it was to kick the knight with tempo, with the knowledge that on the next move I can now kick the bishop with tempo and just keep steamrolling a little bit. I don't know if this is any good, to be honest. But, I mean, and it does block my bishop in. But he retreats his bishop. I don't know. I feel like we just keep on pushing, right? What if we push d5 in the center, right? We can't really use our bishop right now. Unless we go b6, bishop a3. I mean b3, bishop a3. Going here would control this pawn push, though, which would be nice. Going here, though, breaks on the color that you want to break on, the light squares. And if you go here and he goes back, maybe you can even play like f4 there and just completely get a bind on the dark squares. I wonder if that's any good. Let's try it. Let's see how Donald Bethlehem reacts. He has 8 minutes and 55 seconds. We have 4 minutes and 45 seconds, so we're down 4 minutes. That's not good. He retreats the bishop, pressures the knight. Could move the knight. But you could support it too. I kind of want to support it. Now putting all my pawns on the dark squares like this definitely weakens my light squares, but I do have a light square bishop helping control them, and the queen's also on light, and his light square bishop isn't really in the best of health at the moment. He doesn't have threats. You know, he's clearly on the back foot. He's cramped, and if he can't break out, that might be a problem for him. I can continue further on the dark squares, putting a bind. He develops his queen, but this is ineffective development. It's just a waste of a move. Because obviously his queen can't go anywhere and doesn't do anything. Huh. This is kind of reminding me of a weird stonewall. Now I feel like maybe my bishop should be on d3 and I should push g4, g5 and go for the attack. But that's not the case. Although g4, let's say I get in g5 and he jumps in the center. Well, I'll always have f5 there, as well as e4. It's awfully suspicious. But I'm going to try it. So this weakens my dark squares here. Opens up my king a little bit, but threatens to open up his king side. So he tries to slow me down with h6, but I can continue with h4 because my g4 pawn's defended twice. Oh, and you want h4 in because now you can also play f5 and he can't blockade with the knight. And where does his knight go? Goes to d8. Suspicious. Although in response he can take, and then if I take and he takes, no, he can't take, he has to move his bishop, and then okay, so anyway, he jumps his knight into the center, just getting out of the way of this. This threatens just a trade, no big deal. The drawback is it undefends the king side, so this helps me. Now I can jump my knight in and get a little help on the attack, or I could just start with the pawns right away. The thing is, if you push F, it really weakens the E5 square a little bit, so you gotta be sure it's what you want to do. I say let's start with G5. Open up a file towards his king. I mean, I kind of want this knight, but it wastes a little time, and if he wants to trade, that's fine. Okay, so I don't get to bring the knight in, which is unfortunate, but I feel like if I go king F2, okay, so he takes, what was there? He takes my knight, this knight, so now I have no knights in the attack. He's really trying to just break me down. Oh, and I blundered, actually. Whichever pawn I take with, he captures the other pawn. I wanted to take this way to open the rook, but not now. So I'm going to take this way, because I don't really care about my queen side. I'm basically going to checkmate him or lose the game. And so I'm going to be playing for something like this. Okay, so he doesn't actually take the pawn. He tries to break down my construction of pawns here. The drawback is it severely weakens the light squares, I feel like. So I'm going to go here because now I have a mate in 2 threat that I didn't have before, the Lolly's mate, because the G6 pawn is strong. He moves the knight, which wastes time. He gets a pawn, but it wastes a lot of time when I'm trying to checkmate him. So I'm going to throw my queen here. If he wants to avoid it, he has to move the rook, but then when I check him and he moves his king, I go here and it's mate. So moving the rook doesn't help. Moving the queen doesn't help. Moving the pawn doesn't help. That's a GG. And yeah, it was a little suspicious play what I was doing, but all the tempi on the knight and bishop just looked really fun and irresistible. So, and this guy's just realizing, and there you go, GG's. I ended with 1 minute 34. He had 6 minutes 38. We take down Donald Bethlehem. I'm gonna fix my camera now. Goodbye.